It began with a signal, 3 brief clicks echoing across a cold European night, drifting through the static of a German radio monitoring station. To the untrained ear, the sound meant nothing. But to the Gestapo officers leaning over the glowing receivers, it was a warning. Somewhere inside Hitler's fortress continent, someone was playing the piano again. Someone was broadcasting secrets to Moscow. And that meant the Red Orchestra was still alive. For years, the German security services had chased shadows, odd radio pulses from basements, coded notes slipped into diplomatic pouches, whispers from factory workers and soldiers who should never have known state secrets. The Reich was obsessed with purity, control, and absolute obedience, yet ironically, a complex web of its own citizens had turned against it. They were not soldiers on the front. They were artists, economists, bureaucrats, intellectuals, journalists, ordinary people horrified by the brutality they witnessed every day. They were the beating heart of the Red Orchestra, the Soviet Union's most powerful intelligence network inside Nazi-controlled Europe. The man who would eventually bind this orchestra together was Leopold Trepper, a Polish Jewish communist with sharp instincts and an unusually calm mind under pressure. Trepper understood something the Nazis didn't: the greatest threats to authoritarian regimes come from within, from the people who see the machinery of tyranny up close. He quietly gathered Germans who disliked Hitler, Belgians who despised the occupation, French citizens who refused to accept defeat. In an age of fear and silence, these individuals formed an unlikely alliance powered by moral outrage, not ideology alone. Germany in 1939 looked invincible. The Wehrmacht marched relentlessly. Europe fell city by city. Yet even as Hitler's triumphs dominated radio broadcasts and newspapers, small cracks spread beneath the polished surface of Nazi power. A few brave insiders like Haro Schulze-Boysen from the Air Ministry and Arvid Harnack from the Economic Ministry began slipping information through back channels. They were high-ranking, respected professionals, but privately, they were horrified by Nazi policies, especially the mounting violence against Jews, political opponents, and neighboring nations. These men knew that dissent meant death, yet they believed silence made them complicit. Their personal rebellion began with something deceptively simple: passing information. Trepper recognized their value instantly. Germany's war machine was enormous, and so was its hunger for secrecy. The Red Orchestra fed that hunger in reverse, stealing, copying, memorizing, and transmitting pieces of information that, when stitched together, revealed the Reich's true intentions. Plans for invasions, aircraft production numbers, troop movements, economic shortages, and, most importantly, the preparation for the greatest gamble of the war, Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. In early 1941, months before Nazi tanks rolled across the eastern frontier, Red Orchestra radio operators had already transmitted warnings to Moscow. The Soviets, blinded by wishful thinking and suspicious of all intelligence that contradicted Stalin's beliefs, ignored much of it. Yet the accuracy of Red Orchestra reports would later become undeniable. Their network had penetrated the very institutions shaping the war. Meanwhile, across occupied Belgium and France, Trepper built sophisticated counterfeit businesses that served as covers for espionage. His agents blended seamlessly into civilian life. Some posed as businessmen trading raw materials. Others worked in diplomatic circles. Still others hid behind cultural or artistic jobs. They forged documents, hid radio sets inside walls, and met secretly in cafes where the clatter of cups covered whispered conversations. Each member knew only a fraction of the whole, but together, their knowledge formed a detailed panorama of Hitler's plans. But every orchestra has a conductor and every signal has an enemy listening. The German counterintelligence service, the Abwehr, and the Gestapo were growing increasingly frustrated by the phantom signals bouncing across Europe. They knew there was an underground network providing information to the Soviets, but the Red Orchestra moved like smoke, shifting, dispersing, reforming. Their radios were small, portable, and difficult to triangulate. Their codes were complex. And their members were disciplined. Each message transmitted risk detection, but without transmissions, the war could not be influenced. By 1942, however, German code breakers finally achieved a breakthrough. The net tightened. A single mistake, one misaligned dial on a transmitter, one too long message was enough. Suddenly, radio operators found themselves surrounded by Gestapo squads. Apartments were raided at dawn. Families heard doors being kicked open, followed by screams and silence. The Red Orchestra had played too loudly for too long. Even then, its collapse was not instantaneous. Trepper escaped arrest several times using disguises and false identities, slipping through cities like a ghost. Many members refused to break under interrogation. A few tried to mislead the Nazis by supplying false information. Some were executed immediately, others faced the humiliating show trials that symbolized the Reich's obsession with crushing any hint of rebellion. The fall of the Red Orchestra was tragic, but its impact had already reshaped the war. Their intelligence had helped the Soviets strengthen their defense of Moscow and understand the scale of Germany's eastern push. They exposed economic vulnerabilities, fuel shortages, and infrastructural weaknesses. They weakened the image of Nazi invincibility by proving that dissent thrived even at the heart of the Reich. And perhaps most importantly, they offered a rare demonstration of moral courage inside one of history's most oppressive regimes. In the post-war years, surviving members were honored quietly but never widely celebrated. The Cold War complicated everything. Some were mistrusted as communists, others were forgotten, and some were overshadowed by the more glamorous tales of Allied code breaking. Yet those who truly studied wartime intelligence understood one thing clearly: before satellites, before computers, before drones and wiretaps, the Red Orchestra had already mastered the art of information warfare. Today, historians describe them not as traitors or revolutionaries, but as ordinary citizens who refused to surrender their conscience, even when doing so almost guaranteed death. Their story is not simply a tale of espionage, it is a reminder that resistance often begins with one person deciding that silence is no longer possible. The Lucy Ring. The message arrived so quickly, so cleanly, and with such microscopic precision that Soviet intelligence officers stared at it in silence, unsure whether they were witnessing a miracle or a trap. A small sheet of encrypted text had just come through a clandestine channel in Switzerland, an island of neutrality floating in the middle of a war-torn continent. The message claimed to describe, in exact detail, a confidential German high command meeting that had concluded only hours earlier. Not days. Not weeks. Hours. If true, it meant someone inside Nazi Germany was leaking secrets at a level never seen before in modern warfare. And the Soviets, hardened by years of deception and betrayal, struggled to believe it. But the information was correct precisely, repeatedly, impossibly correct. And behind this flood of confidential German war plans stood a man who never fired a gun, never commanded an army, and never stepped onto a battlefield: Rudolf Rössler, code name Lucy. To understand the Lucy Ring, one must first understand its setting. Switzerland during World War II was more than a neutral country, it was a pressure point, a crossroads, a place where diplomats, traitors, refugees, spies, and soldiers moved like pieces on an overcrowded chessboard. Each cafe hummed with coded conversations. Each hotel room might conceal a hidden radio. Each newspaper vendor might be an informant. Switzerland was neutral in name only beneath its calm exterior. It was one of the busiest espionage markets in the world. And in this chaotic ecosystem, Rösler was an anomaly. He was not a trained spy. He was a mild-mannered publisher with fragile health, soft manners, and a reputation for being almost painfully modest. Yet his mind absorbed information like a machine. Friends and acquaintances, many former German officers who despised Hitler's direction, began confiding in him years before the war. They trusted him, not because he demanded secrets, but because he listened, he remembered, and he understood the moral collapse happening inside their homeland. When war erupted, those whispers became documents, and those documents became a pipeline. German insiders, horrified by the brutality spreading across Europe, began leaking operational details to Rösler. But it wasn't a trickle, it was a flood. Operational plans, orders of battle, armament statistics, troop transfers, dates of offensives, even the personal directives of Hitler himself somehow found their way into Rösler's hands. The speed was almost impossible. Sometimes the information reached Rösler before German field commanders received their own instructions. The Allies had never seen a pipeline like this. Rösler, unlike most spies, had no desire to enrich himself, gain power, or play political games. He simply believed that giving accurate information to the enemies of Nazi Germany was a moral duty. His operation remained small, quiet, almost invisible. He avoided the theatrics common in espionage circles. No dramatic disguises. No coded phrases. No dramatic smuggling operations. His weapons were trust, relationships, and a near photographic memory. But even Lucy needed a channel to turn his information into impact. Switzerland's neutrality was fragile. Intelligence transfers had to occur with surgical precision. That is where Alexander Rado, a dedicated Soviet intelligence officer operating in Switzerland, entered the picture. Rado's network handled the dangerous part: encrypted transmissions, dead drops, and the movement of microfilms. Rösler rarely touched the dirty work. He remained the brain behind the curtain, feeding Rado's system from a safe distance. And then came the question that would haunt historians for decades: who were Lucy's sources? How did he obtain such sensitive documents so quickly? There were three major theories, each plausible, each dramatic. The first suggested that Lucy was receiving information directly from high-level German officers who despised Hitler's reckless leadership. Some believed these officers were part of, or sympathetic to, the very groups that later attempted to assassinate Hitler. This theory explained the level of detail Rösler acquired, but it raised a troubling question: how had so many elite officers survived without being detected by the Gestapo? The second theory was even more explosive. According to this view, Lucy was actually a discreet channel used by British Ultra, the Allied code-breaking operation that had cracked the German Enigma system. The British, terrified that the Nazis might realize their codes were compromised, allegedly passed intelligence to the Soviets through Rösler to hide Ultra's involvement. It was an elegant deception. The Soviets received vital intelligence, but believed it came from human sources, not code-breaking machines. The third theory blended the two. Maybe some information came from disillusioned German officers. Maybe some came through British code breaking. And perhaps Rösler himself never fully knew which was which. Regardless of the source, the impact was undeniable. When Germany prepared to launch its massive offensive at Kursk in 1943, the Soviets were forewarned through Lucy's network. They constructed deep defensive belts, repositioned reserves, and prepared their tank formations with uncanny accuracy. When the offensive began, German commanders were stunned to find the Red Army already waiting for them, perfectly positioned. The Lucy Ring had helped shift the balance of the war. What made the operation extraordinary was Roessler's strange combination of invisibility and effectiveness. He never behaved like a man carrying the weight of world-changing secrets. He refused payment. He kept no archives. He sometimes refused to read certain documents because he believed possessing them would make him a greater risk to the people who trusted him. He feared fame, avoided authority, and never attempted to direct military strategy. His moral clarity was simple: he would deliver information to stop a monstrous regime. Yet success breeds danger. As the war dragged on, Swiss authorities tightened their monitoring of radio transmissions, German pressure increased, and internal tensions within the Soviet network rose. Rado's group was eventually compromised, and the Lucy Ring's channel weakened. Still, Roessler himself was never arrested by the Nazis. His anonymity, his quietness, and Switzerland's unique position shielded him from Germany's grasp. After the war, Roessler did not bask in praise. He remained haunted by the war's devastation and burdened by the knowledge he had carried for years. He avoided claiming credit, refused to identify his sources, and expressed guilt for those who had risked their lives to pass him information. If anything, he seemed ashamed of being remembered at all. His life ended quietly, his name familiar mostly to intelligence historians and scholars of espionage. Yet his legacy is extraordinary. Without firing a shot, without raising his voice, without stepping onto a battlefield, Rudolf Roessler may have saved tens of thousands of lives simply by telling the truth quickly enough to matter. The Lucy Ring stands today as a reminder that wars are not won only by armies. Sometimes, they are shaped by the quiet, almost invisible work of individuals who understand the power of information and the moral responsibility that comes with it. The Shadow Empire, Soviet intelligence in World War II. In the shadows of the world's deadliest conflict, an invisible empire thrived silent, disciplined, and deadly efficient. While tanks roared across the plains and bombers rained fire from the skies, the Soviets waged a parallel war that few even knew existed. It was a war fought not with steel and artillery, but with whispers, codes, and the most human of weapons, deception. At the heart of this invisible empire was the GRU, the Soviet Military Intelligence Agency, whose operations extended across Europe, Asia, and even the Americas. The GRU's mandate was clear: gather information about every potential threat, infiltrate enemy decision-making structures, and, if necessary, sabotage the enemy from within. Unlike other intelligence agencies, the GRU combined the meticulous precision of a military command with the creativity of a clandestine network. Its operatives were trained to assume multiple identities, to speak multiple languages fluently, and to disappear completely into the fabric of their surroundings. The motto was simple but lethal: trust nothing, suspect everything, and act only when you have certainty. Parallel to the GRU operated the NKVD, a domestic and foreign security organization that blended secret police functions with intelligence operations abroad. Known for its ruthlessness, the NKVD was tasked not only with rooting out dissent within Soviet borders but also with projecting Soviet influence globally. Unlike the Red Orchestra or Lucy Ring, which were morally driven human networks, the NKVD functioned with state authority, often employing coercion, blackmail, and even assassination. Its operatives were feared, respected, and sometimes indistinguishable from ordinary citizens, a cloak that made their reach almost limitless. The genius of Soviet intelligence lay in its layered approach. While individual networks like the Lucy Ring fed highly accurate, near real-time information to Moscow, the GRU and NKVD created redundancies and overlapping channels that ensured the Soviets were never blind. Diplomats, journalists, Academics, émigrés, and even businessmen could all serve as spies, often unwittingly. The intelligence infrastructure was so vast that one could attend a conference in neutral Switzerland, buy a train ticket in Berlin, or sip coffee in Paris and still walk past someone who might be reporting to Moscow. This system relied heavily on human intelligence, but it was not limited to informants alone. The Soviets mastered the art of counterintelligence, intercepting communications, manipulating enemy perceptions, and occasionally feeding false information to mislead the Germans and their allies. Every message was assessed with extreme caution, verified through multiple channels, and cross-referenced with other reports. What Moscow received was a mosaic of observations, sometimes mundane, sometimes explosive, but always scrutinized. Among the most remarkable aspects of Soviet intelligence during World War II was its ability to operate globally under extreme pressure. Even as entire nations were occupied, and borders were militarized, the GRU maintained networks in neutral countries, Axis territories, and even among exiled governments. It cultivated spies in Britain, the United States, and Scandinavia, often using diplomats as cover, sometimes sending operatives across enemy lines in audacious missions that required meticulous planning and nerves of steel. Intelligence operatives would infiltrate factories, government ministries, and military headquarters, often relying on intuition, courage, and linguistic skill to survive. Failure was punished harshly, sometimes fatally, but success could tilt the outcome of battles. One of the more fascinating aspects of this intelligence web was the integration of ideology with pragmatism. Soviet agents were trained to value loyalty to the state, but also to prioritize mission success above all else. This duality produced operatives capable of remarkable innovation. For example, couriers disguised as journalists could attend press conferences, note the slightest shift in enemy rhetoric, and transmit observations without ever arousing suspicion. Academics could publish ostensibly benign papers that secretly conveyed troop movements or technological innovations. Even travelers carrying innocuous luggage could smuggle microfilms containing critical blueprints, maps, or orders. The effectiveness of Soviet intelligence was dramatically apparent during pivotal moments of the war. Prior to Operation Citadel, the Germans' massive offensive at Kursk, multiple Soviet networks provided detailed troop layouts, supply information, and strategic intentions. Moscow was not only forewarned, but able to preposition forces in a manner that transformed what could have been a catastrophic defeat into a decisive defensive victory. Similarly, in the Pacific Theater and Eastern Europe, GRU and NKVD operatives helped track Axis collaborationists, locate strategic resources, and anticipate counteroffensives. Yet, success came with constant danger. The Germans and Japanese maintained extensive counterintelligence operations, employing double agents, surveillance, and ruthless interrogation to crush resistance. Every Soviet spy operated under the threat of exposure, torture, or execution. Networks were vulnerable, and mistakes could lead to entire cells being annihilated. Yet the Soviets' insistence on compartmentalization, where no single operative knew the full scope of a network, often ensured that even compromised agents could not unravel the entire system. The adaptability of Soviet intelligence extended beyond mere survival. They innovated in communications, using encrypted radios, invisible inks, dead drops, and coded telegrams. They also cultivated what modern strategists would call strategic human capital, agents who could think critically, improvise, and operate independently, often for months or years without direct guidance. Unlike purely mechanical intelligence systems, this human-centered approach allowed the Soviets to anticipate not just actions, but intentions. After the war, the legacy of the GRU and NKVD became even clearer. Surviving operatives were absorbed into the nascent Cold War intelligence apparatus, carrying forward lessons of clandestine operations, counterintelligence, and global espionage. Moscow's ability to influence European politics, shape post-war treaties, and maintain early warning systems was built on the networks painstakingly developed during the conflict. The work done in dimly lit rooms, behind false walls, and under the cover of neutrality had enduring strategic significance. Perhaps the most remarkable truth about Soviet intelligence during World War II is that its operatives were not celebrated heroes. Unlike soldiers on the battlefield, they rarely appeared in newspapers, memoirs, or history books. Yet their influence shaped outcomes, often preventing catastrophes, accelerating victories, and tipping the scales of war. Ordinary citizens, academics, and bureaucrats trained or coerced became instruments of a shadow empire whose reach spanned continents. The story of Soviet intelligence reminds us that wars are fought not only with guns, tanks, and bombs, but with information, trust, deception, and courage. In an age when conventional armies dominated headlines, the real battles often took place in silence, in intercepted messages, in encrypted transmissions, in whispered secrets carried across borders by individuals who risked everything without recognition. These men and women operated in obscurity, yet their impact resonated across Europe, Asia, and beyond. In the end, the success of the Soviet spy networks during World War II demonstrates a fundamental truth about conflict: the pen or the whisper, the coded message, or the unseen observation can be as potent as the cannon. It is a legacy of meticulous planning, extraordinary courage, and an unwavering commitment to a cause that, in many cases, remained invisible to the world until long after the war ended. The shadow empire of Soviet intelligence was the quiet engine behind Moscow's survival, the hidden hand guiding strategy, and a testament to the idea that information, in the right hands, is one of the most formidable weapons ever conceived. The Hunter and the Hunted, German counterintelligence vs. Allied spies. It was a silent war waged in hotel corridors, dimly lit train compartments, and the shadows of occupied streets while tanks rolled through Europe and bombers painted the skies with fire. Another battle raged, a battle where every word, glance, and letter could mean life or death. This was the domain of the German counterintelligence apparatus, the shadowy hunters relentlessly pursuing Allied spies. Yet in chasing shadows, they themselves often became the prey of deception, betrayal, and the invisible hand of intelligence networks that stretched across continents. Germany's counterintelligence machinery was vast and ruthless, divided primarily between the Abwehr, the military intelligence service, and the Gestapo, the secret state police. Both agencies operated with efficiency, secrecy, and often brutal methods. The Abwehr specialized in detecting foreign spies, intercepting communications, and infiltrating enemy networks. The Gestapo, on the other hand, maintained domestic control, rooting out dissent, resistance movements, and internal leaks. Together, they created a net that Allied operatives found increasingly difficult to penetrate. Despite its reputation, German counterintelligence was plagued by internal contradictions. Rivalries between agencies, personal ambitions, and political interference often undermined operations. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, notoriously walked a fine line, sometimes covertly aiding anti-Hitler elements while outwardly executing his duties. Such dualities created opportunities for Allied intelligence services, who could exploit not only operational weaknesses but also the fissures of trust within German institutions. The Allies, primarily through the British Special Operations Executive, SO, Office of Strategic Services, OSS, in America, and resistance networks across Europe, adapted rapidly to these conditions. Spies were trained not just in sabotage and code breaking but in the art of survival under extreme surveillance. They memorized complex routes through occupied territories, created false identities with convincing backstories, and developed ingenious methods for transmitting information. Invisible inks, microdots, hollowed-out objects, and cleverly timed radio transmissions became standard tools of the trade. One remarkable aspect of this contest was the use of double agents. The British double-cross system brilliantly turned captured German spies into channels of disinformation. These agents fed carefully crafted misinformation back to Berlin, convincing the Germans of false Allied plans, exaggerating troop numbers, or hiding the location of imminent invasions. Such operations were not only complex but psychologically taxing. A single slip could reveal an agent's duplicity, leading to immediate capture and execution. Yet the psychological warfare paid dividends. German commanders often acted on these false reports, sometimes diverting entire divisions based on information deliberately designed to mislead them. Meanwhile, the Gestapo's relentless surveillance in occupied territories forced Allied networks to adapt constantly. Safe houses were moved, couriers changed routes, and messages were transmitted in increasingly convoluted ways. Yet despite the danger, spies infiltrated German-controlled ministries, factories, and transport hubs. In France, operatives from the sabotaged rail lines used for troop movements, while simultaneously passing critical intelligence to London. In Norway, agents monitored naval bases and reported on U-boat deployments. Each success came with immense risk, and every mission carried the constant threat of betrayal. The intelligence duel extended to cryptography and signal interception. The Germans relied heavily on Enigma machines for secure communication, but the Allies, through code breaking at Bletchley Park and other centers, gradually pierced these codes. This introduced a new dimension. The Allies could not only gather human intelligence but also intercept, decode, and manipulate German communications. The cat-and-mouse game intensified. German counterintelligence scrambled to detect leaks, introduce new cipher procedures, and train officers in signal security, while Allied cryptographers and spies simultaneously sought weaknesses and devised strategies to exploit them. Germany's obsession with internal security also led to increasingly draconian measures. Routine identity checks, raids, and public executions served both to punish and to instill fear. Spies captured by the Gestapo faced not just interrogation, but psychological torment designed to extract information quickly. Yet even in this environment of terror, Allied networks proved resilient. The SO's training emphasized adaptability, improvisation, and mental toughness, cultivating agents who could think on their feet and act decisively even when surrounded by danger. Another defining feature of this intelligence struggle was geographical complexity. Allied spies operated in cities crawling with informants and patrols, in remote forests used for resistance operations, and across borders monitored by multiple Axis powers. Smuggling maps, photographs, and military orders required not just courage but logistical ingenuity. Every movement was carefully calculated, from the timing of trains to the pattern of civilian traffic. Mistakes could cost entire networks their operational integrity, yet success meant that Allied high commands received the actionable intelligence necessary to plan offensives and defend vulnerable points. By late 1943, the interplay between German counterintelligence and Allied espionage reached unprecedented sophistication. The Gestapo, though feared, was stretched thin. Resources were diverted to multiple fronts, leaving gaps that the Allies exploited. Networks in Belgium, the Netherlands, and Scandinavia thrived under careful supervision, providing continuous streams of information. Couriers carried reports across enemy lines with methods so creative that capture was often avoided by a fraction of a second, a lucky coincidence, or sheer ingenuity. Perhaps the most striking lesson of this period is the human dimension of espionage. Both the hunter and the hunted were bound by skill, courage, and moral judgment. Mistakes were punished severely, but ingenuity could rewrite outcomes. A single misdirected letter, a tiny misinterpreted gesture, or an unforeseen interaction could ripple across the war, influencing decisions at the highest levels. Intelligence was not merely a tool, it became a weapon capable of shaping entire campaigns, and those who wielded it did so under constant, lethal pressure. By the end of the war, German counterintelligence was exhausted, fragmented, and overwhelmed. Allied networks had grown stronger, more sophisticated, and more confident. Operations that once seemed impossible, penetrating ministries, intercepting communications, turning agents, had become routine. The human cost was enormous, yet the results reshaped battles, influenced strategic planning, and, in many cases, saved countless lives by preventing ambushes or forewarning of German offensives. The story of German counterintelligence versus Allied spies during World War II is not just a tale of operations, agents, and codes. It is a story of ingenuity in the face of tyranny, of ordinary individuals stepping into extraordinary danger, and of an invisible war that unfolded alongside the more visible campaigns of tanks, planes, and artillery. The hunt was relentless, but so was the skill, courage, and resourcefulness of those who dared to defy one of history's most fearsome intelligence machines. In the end, the war in the shadows proved one simple truth: victories on the battlefield were inseparable from victories in the mind, in secrecy, and in the endless contest between observation and deception. In that silent war of intelligence, the hunters and the hunted defined the very shape of history, even as the world above continued to burn.